Good morning. Welcome to Coffee with Connie. I'm Connie Foote with Foote Title Group, and I really appreciate you taking the time to tune in today. We try to get together a couple of times a week to talk to you about things that have to do with real estate, whether you're purchasing a property, selling a property, doing a construction loan, refinancing your home. There's so many different pieces that go into purchasing and selling and refinancing a home. So we like to try to get on a couple times a week and talk to you about things that are going on, that we see that are going on in the economy, maybe some things that we've gotten some questions about, maybe some things that maybe you have some questions about. So I wanted to get together with you this morning and talk to you specifically about this potential issue that we have seen a couple of times, and more recently a little more often than I like. Hey there, Karen, how are you? Thanks for tuning in. Good morning, Anita. And if you're tuning in live or on the replay, feel free to reach out and say hey. Let me know that you're on. If you have a question, please either message me while we're talking or message me through the group, because sometimes we're talking about things that maybe will help other people, and it'll also help me understand what kinds of things you don't understand and that you might want to talk about some more. So thanks for your time. I appreciate you tuning in. Hey there, Melanie. How are you? So this came up recently. We were working on a closing for a seller, and when we went to do, the seller obviously had gotten a contract on their property, and the purchaser was working on getting their loan squared away. And at the time, we did the title search. They gave us the contract, so we started doing our part of the process. And when we did the title search, we found that the seller owned a fairly large piece of property. If I remember correctly, I think it was 7 or 8 acres, and the house sat on one of those acres. The house sat on part of that property, and that particular piece was subdivided, separated that house from the rest of the property. And when the when that seller originally purchased that property, it was one big, large piece of property. So let's say, for argument's sake, it was 8 acres. And at the time, with that 8 acres, they decided that they wanted to maintain some of that property in what's called an agricultural setup. So some areas will allow you to divide some of your property and designate a particular part of it as just agricultural, just forestry. And sometimes people may do that because maybe they're farming, or maybe they have animals, or maybe they want to leave part of their property undeveloped. And by doing that, in a lot of areas, the government will allow you to do that and then have that particular area that's divided, that's untouched, or that's agricultural at a lower tax base. And so it's an appealing thing to do, and a lot of people will look at that when you're talking about in rural areas. So in this particular scenario, this particular seller had purchased the property, and they purchased it as the whole 8 acres, and then they decided to divide out just 1 acre where the house was, that was going to be their living area, and then the remaining 7 acres was going to be property that I think in their case was agricultural. So they decided to divide that, and once they divided that property, then you had 2 subdivided pieces of property. You had a 7 acre piece and a 1 acre piece. And when they originally purchased it, they placed a mortgage on the whole 8 acres. Well, at some point, they had some financial trouble, and the bank decided to the sellers couldn't afford to repay that mortgage, and so the bank said, well, if you can't repay the mortgage, then we're going to come in and foreclose on that property. And so the seller said, no, I own this 1 acre, and I really want to maintain this, and I don't want that to be part of this foreclosure. And the bank said, well, we have a mortgage on that part. And the seller said, well, okay, let's make a deal. And they were able to do a loan for just the 1 acre, and the bank foreclosed on the 7 acres. Well, the problem with it was when the seller decided to go sell that property, they didn't realize when that other 7 acres was foreclosed on that it wasn't still, when they refinanced, they didn't refinance all of that property. So they thought they still owned the whole 8 acres. And the problem is when they went to sell it, they went to sell the whole 8 acres as 2 pieces all at one time. Well, The person who bought the property, the 7 acres at foreclosure, never did anything with that property. So the seller lived there for quite a while, not realizing that 7 acres was not refinanced in their new loan and that it was actually foreclosed on. They thought that when they purchased or when they refinanced it to try to save what they were dealing with in the foreclosure, that they were refinancing the whole 8 acres, both pieces. And they weren't. They only refinanced the 1 acre and not the additional 7 acres. So when they went to resell it, they were selling it as 8 acres. So there was a purchaser who decided to purchase this particular piece of property. And when the purchaser gave us the contract, we were doing the closing for that, the agents all thought that it was the complete 8 acres. And we did a title search on the property, and the title search revealed that the seller only owned 1 acre and not 8 acres. They didn't own the other 7 acre piece that was on the other side. Now, it wasn't where their house was in the scenario in the example, but this is the kind of thing that can come up. So when that came up, of course, the buyer says, well, gosh, we were going to buy 8 acres. I don't want to buy this now. The seller now thinks that they own a lot more than they do, and they don't have the value that they thought that they had. And so obviously, it was something that we weren't able to close on because of this kind of thing happening. So let's talk about some other scenarios that could happen with. So if the property that you're purchasing, there's several different things that could come up. The seller is going to sell a piece of property and they've been living there for quite some time, and apparently maybe there was a owner in one of the previous ownerships. Let's say, for example, the owner previous to the current seller, when it was transferred, one of the parties that had a potential interest. Let's say that the parties that owned the property before your seller were a husband and wife, and tragically they were killed in a car accident. And so then you have several children, and let's say that maybe they had 3 adult children, and one of those adult children was no longer surviving them as well. And so then you had that adult children's children or spouse or both that have interests in the property. And I know it sounds a little involved, but it happens frequently, particularly when you're talking about property that's been in a family for a while. Then you need to address all of those potential people that could particularly have an ownership in that property. And if the company that did the closing did not dig deep enough through all of those pieces, they may not have gotten one of those people to sign off their interest. So now you're the owner and you're trying to sell your property, and you go to sell it, and one of those potential previous owners says, wait a minute, my parents owned that property, and it goes up, there's some public notification about that sale, and that one of those parties comes back and says, hey, my parents owned that property, and my sister-in-law, who was out of the country at the time, didn't know anything about that. So you're trying to sell a piece of property that you don't potentially own, and now we've got to go through getting through some of those pieces of that particular puzzle. I mean, hopefully in that particular case, the person that had that ownership interest may have only just not been signed off, but didn't necessarily require a payment. But, these are some of the things that title insurance would cover that seller or that current owner for when those kind of things come up. Let's say, for example, when we're talking about our house sitting on a piece of property that we don't own, maybe we were in a particular scenario where the one of the previous owners sold their interest, but didn't, all of the owners didn't sell their interest. So when the seller purchased it, again, maybe you have somebody that didn't sign off on that ownership, and you're again running into a problem where you have a seller who is trying to sell a piece of property that maybe they don't have 100% interest in. Let's talk about the subdividing situation again, because we have another scenario that has happened in our office where we were, again, a piece of property was being sold. We pulled the title search on the property and did some research and found out that when the seller decided to subdivide some of that property, when those property lines were drawn, maybe they were drawn and well, in this particular case, we're talking about a 5-acre piece. The property was divided in 3 acres and 2 acres. And when the seller was selling off the 3 acres where their house wasn't sitting, they actually signed a deed that sold the property where their house is sitting and not the piece where their house isn't sitting. And so no one came up and brought it to their attention until we went to do the closing and found out, wait a minute, you sold someone else the piece where your house is. Now, luckily for them, the person that purchased the 2-acre piece where the house was actually thought that they were purchasing the 3-acre piece and were willing to make a change and sign a deed transferring that ownership interest. But, you know, these are real life scenarios that can happen, that come up, and you have no idea until you actually get ready to go to closing, or you are doing a refinance maybe and someone's doing a title search, or maybe you're doing some research on your property and you find out some of these unusual kind of scenarios. So these, both of these, the 2 situations where the sellers had divided their property, both of those are real scenarios that have happened in our office. And so these kind of things can happen. So what I want to talk to you about a little bit with that is what do you do about that? How do you get protected? What happens? How do you take care of it? Hey there, Mark, how are you? Good morning, Jeff. Thank you for tuning in. Hey, Tony, how are you this morning? Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I want you to know how important it is that I let you know how important it is for you guys to be on and to reach out to me and take your time. I really, really appreciate it. So let's talk about what happens when those kind of things come up. So you're the seller and you're getting ready to go to closing and this kind of thing has happened. Let me give you one other scenario that might even be more common if you're not in a rural area. You could be in a subdivided area. Maybe you're in a neighborhood where there's lots of homes and you purchase it from a builder and you are getting ready to sell your home. It's 5 years later, and you know, when you went to closing, everything was fine. Let's talk about one other scenario that's a little bit that can happen. It has happened, and I've seen it several times. When you went to closing and the builder's title company did the closing for you, they pulled the wrong legal description for that property that you're purchasing, and they gave you a deed. The builder signed off on a deed that was actually for the home next door. And it's a clerical error, but it is in fact a problem. When you go to close and sell that property, you're not selling what you thought you were selling. You are actually selling the next door neighbor's house, who happens to live in their house too and wouldn't be too happy knowing about it. So it is some paperwork that needs to get resolved, and in that kind of scenario, hopefully it's a simplistic fix. By doing some paperwork that we can help prepare for you and get recorded to get it resolved. But they are steps that need to be taken care of. So let's talk about what happens to those where you've sold it to someone else and where someone else comes back and claims an ownership interest. That's where title insurance comes in. And I talk all the time about protecting your home ownership. But when we're talking about protecting your home ownership, we're talking about exactly that. You bought something, you thought you were purchasing something, and you didn't get that something. So what's going to happen now? So what immediately needs to happen is a contact of your title insurance company. You will have a policy. It looks like a homeowner's policy. It looks just like any other insurance policy, and it describes what is protected. Now, the tricky part in when you actually went to closing on something and when you went to closing on something and you ended up having a legal description of a property that was something else, it's going to take a little bit more of a process to get that resolved. But with all of the parties involved, then hopefully, you know, everybody realizes what happened and they're willing to sign the paperwork to get it resolved. But you'd immediately contact that title insurance company from that policy that you got at your closing. Now, if we're doing the closing for you, we're certainly going to be able to help you walk through some of those steps. Or the company that did your closing. Hey there, Sheila. How are you this morning? Good morning, Pandora. How are you, girl? So we can help you walk through it. You can contact the company that did your closing and they can help you walk through it. But you want to actually make a claim on that policy so that the title company attorneys can step in and try to get this resolved for you so you can sell your property. Because if you think that these sound like unusual situations, they're really not. It happens more often than you would think. And it's going to hold up your closing, and unfortunately your buyer's not going to be interested in purchasing something that you really didn't own that you thought you did. So hopefully I helped you a little bit, or maybe you think about some questions, maybe some things that are a little bit unusual. There's some easy ways to do some research on your property to make sure that what you own is what you think you own. It more frequently happens in more rural situations than more urban situations, but to say that that's not true in an urban situation is absolutely not true. Title insurance most commonly covers things that are, what we see most common are things that are clerical. And getting those resolved sometimes can be difficult, sometimes not necessarily difficult. So title insurance covers you for a lot of different things that we talk about all the time, but at the end of the day, it protects your home ownership, and you want to work with a company that is solid, that you do the research. Don't just let someone tell you, hey, I think you should deal with this company for your closing, and don't give that responsibility to someone else, because ultimately this protects your home ownership. And what happens 5 years from now when you want to sell that home and what you thought you owned, you really didn't own? So that right title insurance with the right company doing your closing is what's really going to matter. So hopefully I helped you a little bit with something you didn't understand. I really appreciate your time today. I have got some great feedback from some people in the industry. As a matter of fact, I had somebody reach out to me earlier this week who I absolutely respect, just an icon in the marketing side of our industry. And I really appreciate his time and feedback. And I appreciate every single one of you for tuning in and letting me know how you feel about the broadcast. Hopefully they help you out. So I've told you about a couple things we have going on our website right now. 10 most frequently asked questions about your home closing. You want to go on there and download it, www.foottetitlegroup.com. It's free. You just have to put your information in there so that we can help you get other resources that we come up with. We're getting ready to start a new month next week, and we have another resource getting ready to hit the street. But all of our other resources that have happened are under the resources page, under either the buyers, sellers, or realtors and lenders page for you. And the other really exciting thing is a week from Saturday, we have our Welcome Home, Make Yourself at Home in King George event. So if you're moving to the Northern Neck area, King George, Westmoreland County, or you just want to come out and say hi in Maryland or Virginia, we're holding this event from on May 6th, which is a week from Saturday, from 10 to noon at the King George YMCA. You'll get to meet all kinds of service providers from the police department, the school systems, the fire department. The police are actually doing a self-defense class. The Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Rails to Trails, the Parks and Rec, the Animal Rescue League. So all kinds of service providers are going to be there to talk to you and let you know about things that are going on in the community that you might need to know about. And you can bring your kids. There is going to be a kids zone with counselors over there watching them, so you'll have time to be able to talk to all of them. So come out and see us. It's a free event next Saturday, May 6th from 10 to noon. We look forward to seeing you. I hope you guys have an amazing day. I really appreciate your time. I'm Connie Foote with Foote Title Group, and this is Coffee with Connie, and we protect your home ownership. Have a great day, everybody. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.